After leaving the military, veterans often find themselves in jobs that don't pan out to be what they expected. In a world of infinite opportunities for transitioning service members, Patrick Malcor, our guest on today's episode, gives incredibly actionable advice for someone working through what's next. As the founder and CEO of Ajax Defense, and someone who spent over 2 decades in the defense contracting world, Patrick shares a clear perspective on how veterans can build meaningful, impactful careers on the other side of service. Patrick's story covers living and working abroad, deciding between working at a startup or large firm, long-term decision making, and how to strategically reinvent yourself to better position for future opportunities. Thanks for joining us on this veteran venture. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military. Nice looking background.
Yeah, well, you're visiting me in the office.
That's right. Is that I see Switzerland over your left shoulder, but I don't think that's
Oh, if you look closely, it's Louisville, Kentucky.
yeah, okay. Nice.
That's where I am, actually.
This is Jack Williams, my co-host, fellow
Hello,
Army
Jack.
Army guy.
Okay. The real
Jack.
knuckle dragger call here, then.
That's right.
We'll get through it.
Jack's out in Hawaii, which some equate that to Louisville during certain seasons of the year.
Yeah,
So.
oh, man. Yeah, that's a lot of people I see say, oh, yeah, Hawaii, Louisville, same. You live out
Especially
there,
in
Jack?
December. Yeah, we do. Yep. We love it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been pretty great. Army brought us out here and I transitioned from service about 15 months ago. So yeah, we're raising our kids
Well,
here.
well done. I hope you planned it that way. Hawaii, last assignment, transition right into Hawaii. That's good.
Yeah. Worked out for us.
Yeah, they've scripted their life pretty well, I'll say that.
All right. Well done.
Yeah, we started this podcast together, having both transitioned out of the Army in pretty recent history, and noticing that the process leaves a lot to be desired, as a lot of others would attest to.
Mhm.
And so we just want to tell the stories of people that are doing awesome things after serving, so that their experiences, their perspective could benefit those that are going through the transition, or maybe have already transitioned out but are trying to figure out what their next step looks like. Because it's, as you know, there's a lot of junior officer recruiters out there that'll probably put you in a large Fortune 500 company, and that might be the best path for some, but not for everyone. And so we're just trying to present some other options that are available to people leaving the service. And I've had a lot of really cool conversations with people that we probably never would have talked to otherwise through this podcast. So it's been a great little experiment in that regard.
Yeah, you guys have had some great guys. I've seen them. I've seen a lot of the podcasts. Of course, your recent ones were friends of mine, and I watched those pretty closely with Dave and Ben Balsley. I really enjoyed those. Dave was just here visiting me in Louisville. We spent the weekend here like a few weeks ago,
Oh, awesome.
and so it was great to see him on your show. Great guy.
Was that just before the Davidson reunion that he came out there? I know he wasn't
It
able
was
to.
just before. So
Yeah.
we were, I made a trip down to Charlotte and we went out with a bunch of old Davidson guys. First time I've been back to Charlotte in 30 years since I graduated.
Wow.
And we went out in Charlotte, a few of us, and I stayed with Dave for the weekend down at Fort Mill. And then the following month, he came up here to Louisville and we went to see a show. We went to see My Morning Jacket in Louisville, and he stayed the weekend with me and we hung out a little bit, caused the fuss. And so it was good to see him. I feel like I've seen him more in the last few months than I have for the last 20 years.
Yeah, no kidding. I was going to say, it sounds like you wore him out. He was recovering a little bit around the Davidson reunion weekend.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry to miss that. It was right before I came back to Louisville. I missed the reunion. So I did go back to the campus and look around. That was pretty cool. We drove around the campus like on a Sunday morning when we went out in Charlotte, and it was really kind of surreal to see it. I think the area around it has changed a lot, but the campus itself, not much.
Yeah.
Still looks, still remarkably familiar as when I was there, and yeah, it really took me back.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see it.
We'll jump into the conversation here, but we'd love to just start with some of your background covering your military time, and specifically, obviously, within line of the theme of the show, honing in on your transition as well. But as someone who lives in Europe full time, I know you've lived there for, what is it, coming up on 20 years now. How does one follow that sort of trajectory. It's very atypical from most that we talk to, having left the service. And I know you've got a lot of overseas time, so I'd love to hear kind of your background and how that precipitated.
Sure. I've been overseas for 29 years now. Since I was stationed overseas, I just had never, I haven't gotten around to coming back yet. So I left Davidson where I did ROTC, joined the Army and was an armor officer and went to the basic course and hung around Fort Knox. My family, my mother's side of the family is from Louisville, Kentucky, and my father, who spent his career in the Army, retired as a two-star general, was also an armor officer. So he was at Fort Knox actually when I was at the basic course. He was doing his last assignment, so I used to pass him on post, and they lived on post when I was in the basic course. And they put him there. He was ECG for First Army, and they put his office there so he could retire in the Fort Knox area. So he and my mother retired near Fort Knox soon after that, actually in 1999. So when I graduated Davidson, I was commissioned, and my first assignment after the basic course was in Germany, third ID, then first infantry division. And I got out as a captain in 2000. It was interesting timing to get out. And I remember discussing, my commander at the time was a guy named H.R. McMaster. And and I remember going to him and saying, "Sir, I really looked up to him and I really liked him and I still keep up with him today." And I learned a lot from him. I said, I think I want to get out of the Army. I want to move on and do something different with my life. And he said, "Well, why? Why would you want to do that?" And I said, "I don't know. It just seems like we're not really doing anything." So this is in, whatever, beginning of 2000. I've been in the Army for 5 years. I'm a young captain, and I was interested in just having a sense of adventure in life and seeing the world, and that was part of the attraction to be in the Army. But having grown up around the Army, and then having been in and had been deployed to Bosnia, spent a year in Bosnia, a little bit of time in Macedonia and the Balkans. And I just thought, oh, there was sort of a certain degree of cynicism. Like, we're not really doing anything. If I'm just going to sit in an office as a staff officer, I might as well go in this private sector, do something else. And I think having grown up around the military, it seemed like I knew what was going to happen in life. And that's how guys talk. If you're around people, yeah, you say, "Hey, what's going on?" They say, "I'm going to the advanced course, then I'm going to try to get command, and the staff job, I'm going to go to the war college," and then get on. They map out their whole life, for their whole career anyway, in the course of a couple of minute conversation. And to me at the time, that just seemed a little boring, and it lacked the sense of adventure, and it felt like we weren't. And I remember explaining that to HR and saying, "Yeah, it doesn't feel like we're just really doing anything." And he's like, yeah, I remember him saying, "Look, the world did not change. We still need, a strong force. We still need good officers." And I said, "No, I want to get out." And so I got out and I did a European out and I stayed in Germany. And I had met my wife, my wife's from Germany, and from that area near Schweinfurt, Germany, where I was stationed. And so yeah, I got out and I immediately got into doing contracting work and working for a large defense contractor. And went to the Balkans and was working with a company called KBR, Brown and Root Services back then. And I got into doing contracting work, and again, under the idea that I was just sitting in the office anyway, so I'll just sit in the office and make a little money and do stuff. And then, of course, almost, just a year later, the whole world changed. And I got just caught up in staying in that industry. And I served overseas a lot. And I went to Iraq and all over Iraq and Turkey and all over the place after September 11th, and just got caught up in that. And somehow sort of came full circle to finding out that was the way I could contribute. I did learn, I liked being near the military, working with. I missed that part. I missed the camaraderie and the quality of people and the values. But I just wanted to contribute in my own way and not be on some sort of program. Not that there's anything wrong with that program, but I just wanted to have more freedom to do different things and change course if I wanted to. And that's how I initially got started. And then since then, I've worked entirely in the defense industry, government contracting for the last 25 years.
It sounds like you ended up spending a lot more time in the Middle East than anyone active duty did as well. You got
Yeah,
your
I
fun in the
did.
sand in for sure.
I was on the planning task order for a contract, big program called LogCap, which is like the big support contract for the Army. And I was on the planning task order for the Iraq deployment in 2002. And I was living in Turkey, in Mersin, working with the 4th Infantry Division, Task Force Iron Horse, as a contractor, helping with their planning and what they would need for logistics and infrastructure support. And yeah, and I was in the Middle East on Christmas in 2002. So I was pretty early on, and I spent a lot of time in that environment, and had I did have an adventure. It has been a great one.
And I remember you mentioned you were one of the first civilians in Iraq during the kind of the invasion then
Because
kicked
of
off.
that plan, yeah. But if you think of 2002 being on the planning task order and going, forward to think about how we were deploying the force originally, and yeah, we were a very small group of kind of the first people going into theater to try to figure out. I remember there was a briefing with one of the generals there who insisted that they wanted to have like eggs and bacon on day one. We were the support contractor serving the food. We were like, all right, sir, but how will we get our employees there? You want to have eggs and bacon? We have to do a lot of hiring and screening and get things built, but we need you there for that. And so it was very early days where we were operating there, without really the military there, and that was an issue. But yeah, it was very early days, interesting times.
You didn't just tell them we'll freeze dry some eggs and bacon, put it in an MRE container, and ship it out with you.
No, I remember briefing that was my only job in the briefing. It was like this big 200 people in this briefing, and it was the task force there and their staff, and they were all just terrifying people. They were just you know permanently foul mood, milling around in this briefing center, and just it seemed like they would eat your face off if you said something wrong. And so I had to get up and brief. Part of it was the meal cycle. I just said, MMM is going to be for the first 20 days. And the commander said, no, that's unacceptable. I said, okay, all right. Like, what would you, how, maybe we could go to hot A's sooner? And he said, no, I want hot A's on day one. Okay, it'll be a little tricky.
Throw a G in there for some goat for lunch. Mix it
Yeah,
up a little.
something. But that was that was the kind of adventure I was looking for, I guess, earlier, to be out there and figuring things out where it wasn't really well established how to support them. And you had, of course, the resources of the military and the US behind you, and a lot of smart, high energy, motivated people around you. And it was really thrilling to go into that environment. And as I have a lot in my career now, and just sort of figure things out. How are we going to do this? We don't really know, but we have the resources and the will to figure it out. So let's figure it out. And that's been pretty cool. I've been involved in a lot of situations like that just through the nature of what I've been doing. So, that's been fun. So that's been my way to contribute and, stay in the game.
How did culture change when you shifted from active duty to the contract side? I mean, we know there's a lot of military presence or post-military presence on the contracting side. Was it similar culture, or did you see a vast difference in expectations and what you were able to do as far as the culture?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that, that is if by way, a roundabout way to answer that without being direct, is that's the one piece of advice I always give to people transitioning out of the military is I think your values are going to serve you well in the rest of your career, right? And however, when you get out into the private sector, don't assume that everybody shares those values, right? I mean, when you're in the army or whatever, in the military, you can take it for granted. We get into the habit, everybody appreciates initiative, loyalty, service, communication, getting things done. I mean, you can recite the Army values, and with some degrees of difference, you get accustomed in your military career to most people around you having those same values. And that's the way, and it's a default operating system. Oh, hey, we take the initiative. We're here to serve. We're here to lead. And so you start to take that for granted in a positive way. It serves you well in your military career to know that you're surrounded by those shared values. However, those may not be the values that all organizations hold in the private sector. They might, and not that that's right or wrong. They might value other things, competition, technical excellence, right? And a lot of tech companies, that's sort of, people get promoted or people get increasing responsibilities on their technical knowledge and abilities and not on maybe their leadership capability. And so it's not that there's anything bad about organizations not sharing those values. So I think the advice I give to people getting out and seeking positions, careers in the private sector is you have to do more to root out and find what that organization's values are rather than just assuming. I mean, there's a lot of stories of people I know, they end up in the corporate world thinking, well, I want to be in a Fortune 500 boardroom, or I really want to be a startup entrepreneur or finance or VC or whatever, and get there and you talk to them a year later and they say, oh God, I hated that. Those people were horrible. I never could get anything done. People don't act the way I expected them to, or whatever, good or bad. And so I think you have to be intentional about that. So I think that's a piece of advice I give, that you have to ask questions and find out what the values of the organization is before you choose to join them. And you do that by asking questions. What happens when this happens? How do you handle this situation? How do decisions get made in this organization? Is it a big process? How do you do planning? How do you allocate resources? I mean, it's a simple thing, but understanding how a culture functions is a muscle that you have to develop in the civilian world, because not all organizations are the same, you know? And so I promised a roundabout way to your question is the answer was, it wasn't always clear to me whether mission was the most important, or I had to learn to put up with politics and navigate people who had different values. Again, good and bad. Not saying corporate America is full of bad people. I'm just saying just different perspectives. So assuming, hey, I'm going to do what's right for the warfighter and support them wasn't actually always the right answer, despite what I learned in the military.
There's this little thing called the bottom line that creeps in as well that you may not have had to account for
Yeah.
while in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a different attitude toward failure and training and development. In the military, we're used to any team having people who are more experienced and people who are less experienced, who are learning that job on the job and being led by the people who are more experienced, right? And so that creates an attitude toward risk and failure and learning, right? That may not exist in the corporate world, where you need to be right, right? There's no time to learn. A lot of times there's no time to learn on the job. There's no tolerance for. So I think, especially back then in that sensitive environment, it has to do with the bottom line, but it's also about sort of corporate risk culture. Is strong risk aversion is very common, and nobody wants to. You learn in the military to take charge. A lot of large organizations in corporate America learn to wait to take charge. Wait till somebody else indicates it's safe to take charge.
That's really good advice. And Griffin actually I mean, that's actually spot on advice for my situation right now. So it's interesting you answered that question that way, because we're thinking about possibly making a small career transition. And I'm in the middle of that decision right now. So thank you for that. That's actually prudent advice right now.
Yeah. Well,
It's
in line
good.
with
Yeah.
that, Jack, Patrick, how do you mentioned guys getting into, people in general getting into positions that they realize the values didn't align after the fact. They're already there. They realize that the ladder they're climbing may not be the one they anticipated it to be.
Mhm.
Does some of that just require getting into it and trial and error, learning along the way and iterating? Or are there any, and maybe I'm leading the witness a little bit here with some of our previous conversations regarding designing your life and that sort of prototyping.
Yes.
But could you speak to that a little bit on maybe some of it is iterating and getting into positions and then learning what you don't want or don't like, but also maybe some of it is some process you can follow before making that step?
Yes. This is very practical advice that I give everybody, including you, at one point, is that a book I always recommend to people is Designing Your Life. And the idea takes from design, the idea of prototyping and iterating products, and that you should try to prototype experiences in advance of having them, to get exposure to what the experiences are going to be like in a as low cost terms of cost to your time and resources and energy as possible. And so what I always recommend to people, very few people do it, but I tell you, it will be it'll have a positive impact, is first of all, recognize if you're transitioning from the military, the extremely unique opportunity you have to go out and talk to strangers about what they do, right? If you reach out to people, you use LinkedIn or social media or just get referrals from people, however you do that, right? If you're interested in something, people will talk to you. You can tell them, hey, I'm getting out of the military, transitioning, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my career in the next step. And I'd like to talk to you about what you do and what your experiences have been. Looking for a job. I'm just looking for information about what you do because I'm getting out of the military. 90% of people and 100% of people you actually want to talk to will say, yes, of course, I'll talk to you. Now, if I did that, people would say, who the hell are you? You know, what I mean, I'm not talking to you. You set me up for something. But you're transitioning out of the military. People have respect for that. People want to help. Again, good people want to help. And so you can reach out to people and ask them, what's it like? So if you're interested in a certain job function, you want to be in marketing or finance, or you want to be in a certain industry, like to transition, I'm interested in healthcare or banking or logistics or whatever, right? Entrepreneurship. I would say reach out and go talk to 50 people. Have 50 phone calls. Sounds like a lot, but you could do it a couple months. The time you're short, you have plenty of time to talk to 50 people and just approach them that way and talk to them and say, again, not looking for anything, just looking to understand, what do you do in a day? What's your life like? What's your day like? Who do you interact with? Ask whatever questions you want. What do you like about your job? Right? What gives you a lot of positive energy? Since you're not asking for anything, you can say, what do you hate about your job? What do you wish you had known before you got into this that you thought, oh, I never would have done this? Right? Take notes, talk to 50 people, and then try to you know, try to make the associations of, are the things they say and like, do I think I would like those things? The things they say and they hate, would that bother me? Or would I also really hate those things? Do I want to make a difference? And you'll have 200 pages of notes, 50 calls of things you learned, and you'll learn about the language and you'll learn about what experiences and lessons they learn, and you'll learn a ton out of that, right? And that'll form the basis of a network in the future. And you're not asking for anything, but you could go back to some of those people, maybe 20 of them, 10 of them that you hit it off with, or you particularly like their feedback, and say, hey, can I come see you for a day? Can I come spend time in your office for a day? And then, okay, maybe not 90%, maybe half of them will say, yeah, come by for a day. I'd like to help you, show you around, maybe meet some other people. And then that's a way of sort of prototyping an experience of living and working in that career or that function or that position, and give you exposure. And you can see how people act, and you'll use your leadership instincts and pick up on a lot of things like the culture and the values, and you'll make great connections. And then maybe one day you'll go back and say, hey, I really the story you told about your company and coming by there. Do you guys have any openings for someone like me? And then you'll already know that person. Or maybe you never do. Right? Maybe you use those 50 calls and you think, that thing I wanted to do that I thought was so cool, it seems like it sucks. And I don't want to do it. And then the world's full of people who wanted to do something they thought was cool and then found out it's terrible. And so that'll prevent you. And then you can start over. And you say, okay, I wanted to do whatever. And now I shifted and I'll talk to 50 more people. Right. But the advice there is, don't miss that opportunity, that window of opportunity, because so many people will talk to you now. If you say you're getting out of the military and you want to learn, you'll have a lot of rich information. It'll form the basis of a network in the future, and it'll give you a taste a little bit. And then finally, when you make a decision, another thing that we do as former military, we think we're on a track. We always think we're on a track for the rest of our careers. If I go infantry, I'm going to be infantry forever, right? You can just change. If you don't like something, if you actually get to the private sector and you join a company or an industry or whatever, or take a position, and you get down a path and you learn, despite what you thought you had confirmed by doing this process, that it wasn't for you, you can just change. That's cool. Nobody cares if you do that, right? It's actually a sign of strength, I think, to realize it's not working for you and just to make a change. But I think that's the flexibility that I was looking for in the beginning of my career that I definitely saw, is don't feel like you have to make the perfect decision. Just get out there and do something that you put effort into affirming was for you. And then don't worry if you want to change it.
I'm not sure if that number was arbitrary, but you're our 46th episode on our podcast. So we're almost
Hey,
to
there you go.
but we're doing almost, I mean, exactly that, right? Not, we don't have 200
Exactly.
pages of notes, but we have all these podcasts that Griffin and I have absolutely benefited from just with having conversations with people like you and learning from just wisdom, one-off comments. Sometimes it's like literally one sentence that I pull and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna pull the strings on that for the next 2 weeks.
Be veteran though. Every transitioning military being, anybody could do that. Have
Correct.
50 calls, take notes, record them. You can record these, So
Yeah, we've got 2,000 pages of transcripts, that's for sure.
Right.
Patrick, how do you think about, you mentioned getting into something and you can always change. You're not signing a 10-year contract like we feel, like we sign up for in the military. How do you think about the kind of the juxtaposition of pushing versus pivot? Like, how do you know if it's the right time to push through maybe that valley of despair, kind of the learning curve into really building a skill set and a career in a field versus pivoting to another field entirely or pivoting to find maybe more energy elsewhere, or see if there's a different direction that's better for you?
hmm. I think, I mean, I can't sound kind of cheesy, but I think it's true. I think even when if you're doing the right thing, even when you're struggling, you're getting joy out of it, right? And there's little wins. You feel like there's some positive energy. I don't think anybody needs to teach us that success requires struggle, and we will have hard days. We all learn that in the military. We will have hard days. But I think you can sense when you're just pushing and making yourself miserable, when you're pushing but having flashes of joy and excitement and the kind of feelings you want to have even when you're miserable. I mean, you don't have to be miserable. The whole if it ain't raining, we ain't training. You don't have to train in the rain. You don't have to be miserable in something you don't like. But I think that's a personal sense of, hey, is this still support my values? Does this give me energy at the end of the day? How do I feel about something I may even be struggling in? Do I end the day though thinking it's worth it? Because if you don't end the day, it's probably not worth it. It's, trust your instincts. I mean, that's sort of esoteric response to your question, but I think that's all there is to it is if you're not finding joy and positive energy in something, even when times are hard, it's a sign.
No, I think that's really helpful. And another thing you said was, you know, as part of those 50 conversations, Jack and I love to, we've mentioned several times on this podcast, if you ask for money, people will give you advice. If you ask for advice, oftentimes it results in a job or some sort of money. And so what those 50 conversations you're mentioning are, that's 50 chances for you to ask for advice. And I would be willing to bet that people that actually go down that road, that are capable, ambitious enough, follow through on what they say they're going to do, probably well before those 50 conversations, they're going to have 10 job offers as a result of those conversations, or connections to other people that probably will have something for them. So such a great practical piece of advice, just have those conversations. And even if you're picking up these nuggets of information along the way, but you're also probably picking up a lot of offers along the way too,
Yeah, oh
being
man,
shown that.
creating tons of value. And by the way, it's a skill you need to have, because the 50 conversations is not much different than a startup where you need to interview users about a product you want to develop for them and understand their problems, and customer interviews. It's not different than due diligence when you want to do an acquisition or make an investment in a large company of another company. You need to talk to a bunch of people and figure out what's good and what's bad and get insights from others. And this kind of, call it networking, or it's more than networking. It's a skill you may not have developed in the Army, where you were more like, maybe you had a mentor, but you were just, you were following the program, had your head down, doing something important, but you didn't need to think much about, oh, do I need to do this or that, or not a lot of creative or purely creative acts, just, professionalism and dedication to a path that you're on and you share with a lot of people. Where in the civilian world, you gotta get to know people and go into unfamiliar circumstances and figure out what's right. And so that skill of talking to 50 people, it applies to so much. So it's a good
And
skill to
and I
develop.
love that you keep calling it a skill because that what to me inherently a skill is something you can get better at. So some people who might be listening might see, oh, like networking with 50 people. I'm just not a good networker. And it's a skill. You have to work at it. I think it's like a chicken or the egg kind of conversation. It's not just people who are successful do the 50 reach outs. It's almost the opposite, right? It's not just this natural God-given talent. It's
Yeah.
people who just do the thing and actually pull the trigger and have those 50 conversations over a few months are the ones that have doors open, and opportunity oftentimes gets confused by luck, or like people create luck oftentimes, and people on the sidelines oftentimes thinks, oh, that's just a lucky guy, or
Just fell out of the sky.
yeah, he just knew
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's no, that was the 60th person he called. you know
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah,
really good
absolutely.
sign.
I don't know if it's anybody does it naturally. It's totally a skill. Something you should just do, whether you are not a networker. I mean, keep your identity small and just do the things that position you for that luck in the future.
Referencing back to your timeline, so you got into the defense contracting. Could you talk through how that played out? And then I know you had a staffing company for a little while. Could you talk about some of the other pursuits you had afterwards? And then would love to obviously get to your holding company now and what you're currently working on.
Yeah, I spent a few years working for a large contractor, learned a lot, and got to do some cool stuff and different things, get exposed to different things. And but after a while, a large company seemed to be a lot more like the military, large established ways of doing. And by the way, that large company was full of ex-military guys. And so, that started to get a little stale. And I joined a smaller company where I was able to move up. In fact, I joined a company because I felt like I was going to have a career in business that I needed to learn sales, right? Something I hadn't learned in the military or working in sort of operations at the large contractor. And I thought, I didn't give much thought to whether I'd be good at it or not. And I didn't think I want to have a career in sales. I thought, but I need to be exposed to that. So I took a job as a sales rep for a company in Germany. And then I was able to join the company and move up and move around. And the company was started growing and changing because they were a defense contractor. And a few years later, I became the CEO, and they were a privately held company. We built offices. We were based in Germany. We built offices in Dubai and in the US and Kazakhstan, and we did logistics support. So I was with that company and the family. It was a family office that owned the company. So I got to be around a privately held company. It was backed by a family who had bought it out, and I became a shareholder in that company. And during the transition early days, I went and got an MBA. I took time. I did part-time. I got an MBA at Chicago Booth School of Business. And so felt like I was, so adding to the skill set, which is something I can come back to in a little while. But I started to feel like I had the wherewithal and skill and competencies to lead the organization. And I got a chance at a pretty young age, I was around 33, 34, to become the CEO of this company. And we grew that company a lot, had a few hundred people. We did an acquisition, we had a joint venture. It was very international. We operated for DoD in about 15 different countries. That was also a wild ride and a great learning experience. It was a smaller company where, things were really not very well established at all. Like, even being a guy who wanted freedom and adventure and being able to figure things out, I was like, hey, we need to put a couple of rules in place around here. I mean, this is
Everybody
kind of
needs left and
crazy.
right limits, right?
Yeah, Roger that. I mean, we need something. And it was really, really pretty wild. And but we built that company up, and again, like I said, I had a couple other companies in that group, and then I was with them for about nearly 10 years. And the majority shareholders decided to sell the business, and we sold in a strategic sale to a competitor. So I went through the kind of M&A on the buy side, M&A on the sell side, and I led that process for the company. And then I really wanted to be an entrepreneur and create my own thing and not work for somebody else. And so I started a company with my good friend Jake Frazier. We started a company called Precision Talent Solutions, which is a great resource for transitioning veterans. If I want to give a shout out to my buddy Jake, who was in the Army with me back and was in the basic course with me in 1994 or five or whenever that was. So we started that company thinking that was an important, that was an important challenge, bringing talent into organizations is an important thing to do and a challenge for every company of any kind. And so I helped start that company. Jake took that forward, bought me out a couple years ago, and then he's developed that way beyond what we did together and still growing the business. And then in 2022, I started Ajax Defense as a private holding company, one other shareholder partner, and I really wanted to go back to supply chain and industrials and specifically interested in defense manufacturing. And so set out with a strategy, a thesis to invest in defense industry, small business defense manufacturing businesses, and raised some money, put in some private capital. And just about 6 months after we formed the business, we acquired a company here in Louisville, Kentucky called Whalen Machine and Tool, which has been around for 36 years, doing DoD work as a high precision machining, manufacturing services business, about 60 employees here doing mostly Navy work. So I have to watch my acronyms and I never know what the heck's going on when they're talking. But and now, continuing to grow that business, investing, doing more acquisitions. For Ajax, I really love that side of the business, the industrial side. I feel like it's just highly stimulating. And I was been on the services side for a long time and logistics and staffing. And now to be on the bending metal side is just super exciting and fun. And it does resonate with me, the question you asked about, are you struggling or should you pivot? Because if you're in manufacturing, there are days when it's a hard struggle and it's not easy, it's complex, and there's a lot of moving pieces. And it can feel like some days, what the heck am I doing over here? But I still get a lot of positive energy and excitement around, making something, serving the warfighter, doing something important, organizing people who also care about the mission around doing that important work. And I can't imagine doing anything different now. So I just will continue to look for other manufacturing companies to invest in, which is what I'm doing now. I'm also an advisor. I joined a defense tech venture capital fund last year, recently, to help them build a portfolio of, more on the startup side in defense tech. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be in the defense industry. There's a lot of tailwinds. I think government is doing some of the right things to position industry to grow and to maybe rebuild the defense industrial base in America. And I think it's an exciting mission. And there's young people coming out of college, getting involved in that and wanting to work for Anduril and Shield AI and all these cool companies that weren't around 10 years ago. And I think that's super exciting and a great opportunity for veterans, for transitioning military to get to transition, but to still stay connected to the mission. And it's an exciting time to be in the defense industry. So that's where my focus is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it coincidence that Whalen is in Louisville, or did you have
It was.
did you have a microscope over that area?
It was a pure coincidence. I was
Wow.
looking broadly, if you're familiar with searching, trying to acquire a company, and especially hard to do the first one, if you're building up a holding or doing a search fund or something like that, the search process is pretty grueling and lonely. And so I looked at dozens of businesses all over the US. And then when this one came, it was actually weird the way they presented it to me. The advisor presented it to me. And he says, he hadn't told me where it was. And he said, it's from a certain place and, they're insular and they like them. They may or may not, I don't know what he was implicating, but they like people from the local area and, it's for a particular buyer who likes to operate in that area. And so where is it? And he said, well, it's in Louisville, Kentucky. I said, oh my God, my family's from there. spent much time there. So it was just pure coincidence. And it's
Wow.
worked out great so far.
Wow. Serendipity, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, destiny, yeah, my mother is constantly reminding me that I waited until she moved away from Kentucky. She lives down in Georgia now, closer to my sister. And as soon as she left, I bought a business and got an apartment here.
I'm sure there's plenty of good ones to buy in Georgia too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for sure. Yeah, I know they're out there, so I'm definitely looking.
Not to backtrack at all, but I'd love to maybe take a few minutes just to, when you're building precision talent solutions and getting that off the ground, would love to hear what you think or what you experienced with regard to what resulted in someone staying, was it specifically veterans you're working with, or was it all
No,
across
it
the?
wasn't focused on veterans. It was focused on serving kind of the government contracting
Okay.
community, companies, helping companies in that industry sector, find talent of all kinds from technical. When we started out, we were just kind of doing everything. Technical people, executives, managers, any kind. I think they're definitely more focused on executives now and having great success with that. But we
Gotcha.
just started with the core challenge of bringing talent to the government contracting industry.
Maybe this is in line with our previous line of discussions with, with regard to values and those sort of things. But were there any things you learned from all those placements from working with that many searches that resulted in particularly successful careers or longevity with companies or people that really found their spot, their niche? And the reason I ask is because in light of those that are transitioning out, trying to find what that thing is, were there any kind of key takeaways that you picked up on or saw from that experience?
First of all, I would say you should have Jake Frazier on this podcast because he's the guy
We'd love to.
with the wisdom, and he coaches a lot of transitioning military and SCSs and does a lot of work in that field. And so I will defer to him on a lot of those questions.
It
I
almost
think
seems
he
like
would.
if you don't live on my street or you're a Davidson graduate, you're not allowed on the podcast. It's kind of like
I know it'll be
that's like
going
the
out.
prerequisite for.
It'll be really going out of your lane to have him on. He went to Vanderbilt. So, that if you can get over that, he'd be worth talking to because he has a lot of great insights and I'll probably steal from him. But I know that he would say, and something I would agree with, and we've talked about a lot, and I tell people transitioning is know your differentiators. Right? I know he's going to say that. He's going to say I stole that from him, but I did. I absolutely did. And he's right. Know your differentiators. Know what it is that makes you different and unique, right? And now this is more coming from me. Nobody in the industry is looking for a transitioning Army officer. We're not looking for that, right? We're not broadly looking for that. I'm looking for an operations manager or marketing executive or a certain function. I'm looking for certain utility and value in my company that you can create, right? So if you're out there floating yourself around as transitioning military, I'm not looking for that. I mean, accept that, right? My advice is you need to do the hard work to connect the dots from your military experience to what kind of value you're going to create in any organization, whether it's a public organization in a government job like an SES or GS job, or it's a company or a startup or whatever. You need to do the work. Don't expect people to map that over, right? I talked to a lot of some people who just got out, or particularly on the senior officer side, because a lot of my peers, now are getting out, and they just sort of assume, well, I can do this job. You know me, and I can do the job, and I have leadership, and I can do the job. Okay, but someone qualified could also do the job and has the experience and leadership. So tell me what it is about your background. Map that over to how you're going to create value in the organization. And that is connected to your different. What's different about you? What's different about me? I had a lot of exposure to industry and I worked with companies of this kind and I understand how they work or whatever. I did a lot of budgeting in my role and I know how to allocate resources or I did a lot of strategy work because whatever it is, everybody's different, right? And so the people who are successful know what's different about them. They map over their skills and experiences from the military and their leadership, which is vast, their leadership experience into how I'm going to create value in the job I want to have for you. And to add it off, they have a story about it. Right. So just don't know your differentiators. Tell me a story about it. Right. My differentiator is I know a lot about manufacturing from my time at blah, 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 right? And, and then tell me about that. I spent a couple years going around. I met business owners and I worked with machine shops and tell me that story to help me make the connection. But so that's kind of the advice I give. Know your differentiators. Do the work to map it to my organization for me so I know how you're gonna come into my company or my organization and make a difference, and seal the deal by telling me a story about it. That's my advice too.
That's great. And on a related note, you mentioned when you went to business school, you were adding to your toolkit. Could you speak a little bit to that concept on how, how
Mm,
people can, whether it's business school or other kind of specialty qualifications or training or schooling to
mm.
better position themselves for those sort of opportunities?
Yeah, I think first in general, a lesson that we learned, something that I took from the military that we all do, maybe unconsciously, is this idea of our career. Let me say it this way: the idea of professionalism and training. Right? When we're in the military, we operate correctly that we're in a profession of leadership, of leading soldiers, service members, right? And that requires certain skills and competencies, and you need to understand even practice. You need to understand tactics, and you need to understand common skills, and you need to develop certain leadership skills to be able to do your job. And your career is dotted with the schoolhouse. You start in the basic course. You start in RTC or the academy. Then you go to the basic course, and then you go to the advanced course, and you go to the workout. We're constantly having experiences and then taking a break to develop ourselves and to the next level, and then going out and applying that, and then transitioning again to development, schoolhouse type of environment, and then going back in. That happens sometimes but a lot less in the private sector, and a lot less as we go up in an organization. As people advance in an organization to more senior levels, the less they think about in the private sector, I mean, the less I see them thinking about their job as a profession, right? They're just there trying to get by, trying to get paid, trying to do their thing and move on, right? Maybe the MBA or getting an advanced degree or graduate degree in your field is usually as far as we go, right? In terms of developing ourselves, a lot of times in a management leadership career. And I think that we should take that from the military and think about our whole career and our whole professional lives as a constant challenge to learn and understand what competencies do I need, what skills do I need, what am I good at, what do I need help with or development on at this stage of my career, and to be able to generally manage and lead people and get stuff done, all the way through my career. We're much more taking people as they are and sort of distinguishing their skills in the organization or not, right? Where we should be thinking about ourselves and the people we lead as developing and training along the way, because I think we would have richer careers. We would be more effective. We might have serendipity and discover new things about ourselves and new skills that we didn't think we had. And that's something we should take from the military into the private sector that I don't see enough of, I guess.
That's a great point. There's a lot of jobs out there that have required continuing education. But that's really just a tiny check the box. It doesn't actually necessarily further your career in a meaningful way, nor does it let you think about things as a profession, like you're mentioning. It's really just I'm doing this because I'm required to. But if you could take that approach, even in careers that don't require CE on an ongoing basis, I think that's a really good way of approaching making it a profession and continuing to improve yourself more deliberately than just falling into
Yeah.
what the next project you're working on is or collecting the next
Yeah,
paycheck.
just trying to push forward. I mean, I remember I didn't do that very intentionally. I felt like it was just my natural way of thinking. I told you about wanting to get some experience in sales. And so I did that. I thought I need to have that, whether I'm good at it, I need to understand at least how it works. And then later when I started my MBA, I had never taken accounting, right? And I had to learn really quickly. I was an English major in college and a cavalry officer, so I was qualified to work at Chick-fil-A. And in terms of my skill set, to not even be like the manager at Chick-fil-A, and so I felt, I need to learn that. I mean, definitely, I was right about that. I need to learn accounting and finance, and learn these. I was doing that because I previously never had envisioned myself being in business or the private sector. I grew up around people in the military. My mother was a teacher. My sister's a prosecutor. I mean, I grew up around people in public service, and I never thought I'd be in business. And why would I need to learn accounting, right? But once I got into saying I want to develop that career and be an executive or whatever, advance my career to a higher level, I thought, oh, well, there's some skills I need here, you know.
It's clear
Yeah,
that you're really intentional about the way you've cultivated your skill set, your overall ability to provide value to organization. I think there's a lot of lessons to learn there from the way that you could have easily stuck with an operations role in a defense contractor, but no, you decided you need to add to what you can provide looking long term so that you can have more opportunity and ultimately provide more value to other employers down the road and to your own endeavors.
yeah. So I think
So
the I'm trying to connect this to somebody who might be transitioning out and really try to tap into your experience on the civilian side. So my question is, with what I seem to be interpreting from what you're saying is the military has a moniker of we're good at training. It's the upper out mentality. Like you should be focused on making the next rank or making the next job. And it seems to me like what you're saying is a lot of people or a lot of companies on the civilian side are more about hiring that person who's qualified to do that job at the moment. And of course, there's promotions within ranks in the civilian sector. But how should somebody who's transitioning out of the military, who may have been relying on that internal training, what should they be focusing on to train themselves to continue to progress their career if they're in a position where their company isn't focusing on it?
I think it's a good question. One of the sources of information about that is your 50 calls, your 50 meetings. You should be asking, what kind of skills do you need to work in this environment? What do you need to know? What expertise do you need that you could learn that you wish you had learned earlier? That'll give you a sense for it. But the more simple answer is personal accountability in your job. What do you think that the skills and competencies are that you need to be successful in this function area sector? And it's on you, right? I mean, the military has taught you, not we train. The military has taught you the need for that at every stage of your career as you develop, you need to learn more skill sets and apply new things and be exposed to get to the higher level. You don't just go straight over there and say, I've been here the longest, so I'm the next in line for this job. No, you go and you learn and develop, and then you go plus your experience, and then you go into that job. The difference in the civilian sector is that's on you. If you want to be successful, it's personal accountability for that. The good news is if you take that personal accountability, you're going to be way ahead of most people, because most people don't think like that. But high performers do. And high performers, I think, are obsessing about it. Like, how am I able to make a contribution? What's missing from my ability to make an impact here? And then nobody's gonna. And some organizations are good, better about training and development than others. There's leadership programs in companies. I'm not saying that doesn't exist,
Mhm.
but broadly, you need to seek it out. You need to take personal accountability for developing yourself, because you don't have the army to do that for you.
Right.
Patrick, there's a two-part question we ask every guest, one ask and one give. So the first being an ask. What's one way that somebody listening to this could help you or your organization in any way?
I think I would like to see more veterans and transitioning military get involved in the defense industry, because, as I mentioned, I think there are a lot of exciting things happening. It's a cool time to be in the defense industry. There's also an important mission and challenge to rebuild or develop the defense industrial base, to start companies, run companies, grow companies, expand capacity, just everything under the sun. There's a lot of important things going on, and that's not just from industry. There may be getting involved in the defense industry is doing something in government that impacts that, right? So I'm not excluding other forms of public service from that. So my ask to people listening is, consider the defense industry, get involved. You try it out, but I bet you won't regret it, because it's important work and highly fulfilling and challenging and rewarding in many ways. And I wish more veterans would come into that to help us build, but also help us retain the values that a lot of us took from the military and brought into industry, and to be able to carry it forward. So that's my ask. More people get in to defense, more veterans stay in the industry. Don't go off and, I don't know what people do, make toasters or sell insurance or something. Those are all fine jobs.
We need
But
toasters, but
we
not as
need
important
toasters
as
and we need
defense
probably need
materials.
insurance, I guess. But whatever. Those are good things. Not crapping on anybody's job, but there's there's important work to be done, and I think more people should give it consideration. And we need people who speak the language and understand the end user and have been on the other side of this stuff. And so that's my ask, and my give is I will help veterans in any way I can to do that through as much as I can. I mean, I have an open door policy. If people want to talk to me about their transition or support they need in their career, if I can make introductions, if I can make a phone call for somebody or give a piece of advice or just to be a sounding board for somebody, I'm always willing to do that. That's my gift.
Awesome. Thank you for that. How would you recommend? You mentioned Anduril and Shield. Are there what's a practical way? And again, 50 conversations within industry for sure. But how do you
Mhm.
see a good way to get involved? Or if you maybe a better way of asking that question, if you were getting out of the army in the next couple of months, how would you think
Mhm.
about getting into the industry?
A combination of those companies are hiring like mad right now, so it's not hard to get in front of some of their requirements. But as we've said before, understand what it takes to be successful in those. Learn something about that company, like any other company. They need people who are engineers, and they need technology, and they need business development and sales, and they need people who understand government budgets and acquisition, and they need people to talk to the warfighter and the end user. And where do you fit in what they need? It's not hard what they need. So where do you fit into that? Do you have the right skills and experience that match your motivation and background? If not, get that experience and show motivation, because people hire character and attitude. Unless you're trying to be like the chief engineer designing a missile or something, you gotta be educated in that. You already know if you can do that or not. In any organization, certainly any company, there's infinite ways to get involved to match your skill. There's an area where you can make an impact if you have the right attitude and motivation and character. So just figure it out. What's different about you? Where can you make an impact? And then communicate that. Have 50 phone calls. Say, this is what I want to do. I want to get involved. How can I get involved? Make me one of your 50.
And also back to the ask, to allow for serendipity potentially to strike twice. If someone happens to know a defense manufacturing company that's fits a certain criteria, I'm sure that an introduction would be probably a welcomed thing, right?
Absolutely. And I would go a little bit further than that. If somebody out there listening, it doesn't really matter who, but particularly veterans, it's a whole nother topic, I think. But if those that want to be involved in entrepreneurship, you want to own your own company, start your own company, I'm more than happy to talk to you and share some lessons learned. I keep a running lessons learned file of things I've learned along the way that I'm happy to share with people. Again, on any spectrum, starting a company, buying a company, whatever. If you're out there doing a search fund or whatever it's called, ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, I'm happy to be a resource, potentially an investor, and share my ideas and experiences there, because that's pretty unique. You could probably do another show about that, but I love to see particularly veterans getting into entrepreneurship. They're just uniquely. I know you've done, I don't know Jack that well, but Griffin, I know, has done some things entrepreneurially, and I think that you're just built. If you're a veteran, if you're a military veteran, you have the character. It's Ranger Handbook. That's what most of entrepreneurship is, just figuring stuff out. And I love to see veterans get involved in entrepreneurship. So if I can help, be a resource, provide capital, I would do that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Jack is very much a shining example of that as well, having started quite a few things. So couldn't agree more that veterans are uniquely positioned to excel really well, be it in large organizations providing value, but also in the entrepreneur world, startup world. But again, back to your earlier point, it takes them putting in the work and the introspection to connect the dots for people. They're not going to be connected for you. You've got to really think through where your piece of the pie is, how you fit in, and how you provide value on a daily basis. And I think that through doing that hard work, it'll result in a lot more joy and happiness in long term as well, because you'll end up in the right spots rather than stumbling around from one to the next trying to chase either a paycheck or a title, which rarely result in that joy that we're talking about. So, Patrick, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will as well, but I would love to pass it back to you for any final thoughts or parting words for somebody who's either currently transitioning or considering going through that transition out of the military.
Can't emphasize enough, put yourself out there, create the skill and the muscle to get to know people, talk to people, make it clear what you're asking for. If you're asking for something, ask for it. That's the most direct way to do it. And for some people listening to this podcast, I would encourage those who have experience and wisdom and have been through transition or other experiences, participate in forums like this, activities to mentor foreign military and transitioning military, and get involved and share your wisdom. And I think you're doing a great service with this podcast and your message, and 46 podcasts so far. We just planned number 47 for you if you didn't have it
Yes, sir.
already. And so I hope that more people out there, whether they're foreign military or not, share their experiences with people in forums like this, 'cause I think it's highly valuable and people can learn a lot from it.
Thank you for that. And if you're at all interested in defense, follow Patrick on LinkedIn, which we'll link in the show notes. Of course, I love seeing the updates you put there. And it's cool following industry through your perspective in that way.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Patrick. This has been great.
Gentlemen, thanks a lot for your time. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.